In this video, we will be continuing on the series of Don't Eat the Yellow Snow in the Lua language and using the Love2D game library. So if you're just starting out with this one, you want to go to github.com, programming rainbow, yellow snow, Lua, and Love2D. That is the repository that we are working with. So you want to grab the URL right here, just this URL here. You'll want to copy this and then use git clone to clone it, move inside of it, and it'll look something like this over here. These are the folders for the code for each video, and this is the fourth video, so we'll be continuing on with the code from the third video. So if you look at the code in the third video, it looks a lot like the files up here. So to follow along with this, you can just remove all the Lua files that are in the top level directory, and then you can copy the Lua files from the video 3 into the top level directory like this. And then you will be right where we are in this video. So I would like to show where we left off with in the last video. So we're just going to run love dot for this directory. And what we have is we have a snowman that we can move back and forth, and it doesn't go off the screen. It stops right when his head kind of intersects with the side, and he can move to the other side. He switches directions, and he's moving at 300 pixels per second, and that should stay the same no matter how your frames per second may change. We also have the snow falling down. It's also falling at 300 pixels per second, and when it hits the ground, it auto-generates a new position somewhere up above the screen. So that's where we're at from the last video. We want to be able to deal with collisions between the snowman and the snowflakes, and then decide what we want to happen with those collisions. Okay, so I'm going to close this. So we're just going to be working with the code in the file in the top level directory here. And I want to look into the game. So we're going to make a new method in the game for the game object. And it's going to be called check collision. I'm going to put it above the update. So I'm going to use the camel case. So I'm using Pascal case for game itself. But then the name of the function is going to be camel case. So it's going to say check and then collision. And we're actually going to be checking each flake. So I'm going to be passing in a flake to this method. So what's going to happen here is as we go through, we're going to go through the whole table of flakes. And for each flake, I'm going to call this method on that flake, and I'm going to pass them the flake. The way I'm going to be checking this is I'm going to check the bottom of the flake up against the top of the snowman of the player. If the bottom of the flake is larger than the head of the snowman, then I know that the flake is somewhere on the screen that is far enough down on the screen that it can collide with the snowman's head. That's the Y that we're checking. So let me just draw this. So if this is, imagine this is the head of the snowman. This is the top that I want to check against, and I have a flake. So if I have a flake somewhere, it could be anywhere. Let's say I have a flake here, and I have another flake that is over here, and another one that is here. Okay, so this flake right here, the first thing I want to do, well, maybe I have a flake over here too. Okay, so if I'm checking this flake right here, if this flake hasn't moved down the screen enough, or could even collide with the player just based on where its head is, if it's not even down there, I don't need to check the X at all. If the Y is not even possible, I can just ignore it. So the first thing I'm going to do is say, hey, is the bottom of this below the top of this? So the numbers get bigger as it moves down the screen. So I'm going to check the bottom of the flake, and is the number on the bottom of the flake larger than the number on the top of the snowman's head? Okay, if it is, let's just say there's another flake here. So if I were to check this flake, that would fail. I would just ignore it. I wouldn't check anything else. If I check this one, the bottom of the flake is not bigger than the top of the head. I don't care. This one too. This one is different, but let's go to this one first. If I check the bottom of the flake, it is bigger than the top of the head. And so is this one here. The bottom of the flake is bigger than the top of the head. So then I would check, well, is the right side of the flake. If the right side of the flake was a bigger number than the left side of the snowman, that's still good. I still need to keep checking. So then I'm going to check, is the left side of the flake smaller than the right side of the snowman? And for this one, it's going to fail. So that means I have no collision that happened. So I'm checking bottom of the flake against top of snowman. And then I'm checking the right of the flake against the left of the snowman. And then I'm going to check the left of the flake against the right of the snowman. So let's check this guy right here. The bottom of the flake is indeed bigger than the top of the snowman. So that check is true. So we go to the next check. Is the right side of the flake larger than the left side of the snowman? And that is also true. So now we do the last check. Is the left side of the flake smaller, as in this way, smaller than the right side of the snowman? And that is also true. So we have a collision. So those are the three checks we're going to do. We don't need to check the ground or anything like that because the ground is already done during the update. So all we need to do is check this kind of, imagine a square around the flake and a square around the snowman. Except we're not using the square around the whole snowman. We're going to use that adjusted square that's kind of around the head. And we will just be using the square around the whole flake because the flake is just a small sprite to begin with. Now, one thing we haven't done is adjusted the snowman's head down a little bit. I don't want it to be at the top of the head because the snowman's head is actually round. So what'll happen is if we draw a square around a round ball and then we put another ball down at the side here, we'll have a collision even though the flake doesn't ever look like it hits his head. So I'm going to bring it down a little bit, say 15 pixels or something down into his head for the collision. So it kind of works a little bit better because this is just box collision that we're doing. So I hope all of that stuff kind of made sense. I'm going to delete that. So one thing we haven't done is set up the top of the snowman. So I should probably set that up first before we get too much into this. So right up here, we're going to put another offset. And this will be the last one. We only need to check actually 3 sides of the player and 3 sides of the snowflake. We never need to check the top of the snowflake, but we never need to check the bottom of the snowman. Those are things that we just don't care about. So we'll put top. And again, the reason why we need to bring this down is because the snowman's head is round and the flake is round. So if we're hitting something where the corner, just the corner of the box is hit, well, it'll never look like the head collided with the snow. So I'm bringing it down. So that's 12, and we're going to do a getter method for this one as well. And since I'm never using self in this getter method, because I'm going to use I'm going to use this top offset, which is a constant, and I'm going to use player y, which is a constant. So I'm going to just be using the top of these. So since I'm just using the top of these, I never need to use the self. So I don't need to use the colon in this one. So it's going to be function player. And instead of colon, I'm going to use period. Top. That's because if I use colon, it's going to say you never used self. So well, let's do it the other way and I'll show you. So we're returning, and this is going to be player y plus top offset. Okay, and it says unused argument self. So we don't need it, so we're just going to switch it over to period. So that gives us the left, the right, and the top. That's what we need for collision detection. Let's just make sure on the flake we have everything. I believe we do. Or no, we don't have the 2 sides. Actually, we only have the bottom. Okay, so for the flake, we're going to add the left and the right, and those are going to be simple. We're just using the box around the flake. So the left is just going to be y, and the right is going to be y plus width. So this one will be left. And the left is just returning self underscore x. And then we'll have this function for the right. And this one is returning x plus width. Okay, so that is our getter methods for bottom, left, and right. And that's all that we need for collision detection. We just need the 3, and we have the 3 for the player now. So that should be all that we need to do in here. We don't really need to do anything else in here. Back in game, now we can actually check. So we're going to be checking the flake against the player. So the very first thing we're going to do is we're going to check the bottom of the flake to see if it's bigger than the top of the player. This will be self.player. And for the top, since we didn't ever hand in self, we don't need the colon, we need a dot. Because we didn't use the implicit self on that, so we didn't use the colon. Now, this is one check, but we need 3 checks. So I'm going to put an and. And we need to check the right side of the flake to see if the right side of the flake is larger than the left side of the player. And we need to do one more and. This one is left. And we want to know if it's smaller than self player right. So if all these are true, we're going to have a then. So it doesn't really matter. So this would be one long if line that carries on and on, but it's okay. It'll understand that there's an if, there's some Boolean values here that this expression is gonna be a Boolean value, and this one, all 3 of these Boolean values need to be true to do the end. So it's gonna understand what's happening here. So if all of these things happened, we have a collision, but our collision is going to be different whether it's a white flake or a yellow flake. A white flake is good, we should get some points, and a yellow flake, the game ends. We already have a method on our flake that checks if it's white. It is white. So let's use that. Flake is white. I believe I have that method set up. Then, so if it's white, we need to reset this flake basically. We can do some other stuff like increment our score and everything else, but for now, let's just reset the flake. So we'll do a flake, reset, and this is not a full reset, so we'll put false here. Else, now this is going to be if it's a yellow flake. So if it's a yellow flake, we want to change the state of the game from playing to no longer playing. So I don't believe I have this, or I didn't create it up here yet. So we're just going to add a variable here that is playing, and it's just a Boolean. That means the state of the game is playing. We're going to put this as true. Down here, I'm going to change the state of that. So it'll be self is playing equals false. Now this is playing, we're not using it anywhere yet. We haven't done anything with it. So what I want to do is actually use this and check at different places. I actually want to create a getter method for this as well. So right up here, I'm going to create another method. And this is just going to return is playing because the main module is going to be finding out if the game is playing or not. And I'm going to use camel case with this because it's a method. And this is just going to return the value. Playing, and that's all that this is doing. So I'm changing the state of it, and now I can check it. So we have this method now. I can use this method in my own code here, but the real reason I created this method is because in main, down here, I'm going to check spacebar, and I want the spacebar to reset the game. But I only want it to reset the game if the game is not in its playing mode. If the game has ended, it can be reset. But if the game is currently being played, I don't want it to reset. So that's why I've created that. We're not going to set it up just yet. Let's go with this. So what I want to happen here is when this yellow collision happens, the yellow flake collision happens, we've changed the state of the game is playing to false. So it doesn't mean anything right now. Nothing happens right now. But what we can do is we can put this in the update. So we can basically update the game if game is playing. But when game is not playing, it no longer updates the game. That means you can't move the player. The flakes will stop moving. The player will stop moving. But the game still gets drawn. So right here in update, I'm going to add that. So we could do this either way. We could use the method we just made, or we could check the Boolean value directly. Since I already have the method, it's safer to me to use that because that method is not allowed to change the variable. It's not allowed to mutate it. It just gets the value back. So it's fine for me. I'm just going to use it. But it could be either way because we're inside of our own kind of game object here. But you could do it either way. So I'm going to self is playing then, and I'm just wrapping this whole thing in this if statement. Okay, so this update will only happen now if the game is playing. Okay, so I'm not going to change anything else. I just kind of want to check this code right now because we have this collision. Every time the white hits the player, it's just going to reset, so that flake should disappear again and fall from the sky again. And when a yellow flake gets hit, the game should just stop. We're not putting in the code for reset or anything. I just want to check it to make sure that is actually happening, and I haven't created any bugs yet. Okay. So it looks like right away nothing's happening because we're not calling that method. So let's add that method. I forgot to do it. So we have this collision method, but we actually need to call it in the update. So in update, when we're updating each one of the flakes, after we update it, we need to call the check collision on that flake. So I'm going to go self, check collision, and I'm going to pass in the flake. So remember, this for loop is going through our table of all the flakes. It's taking one flake out at a time. It's running the flake update, and then I'm going to run this method that's part of game that's going to check the flake. So we definitely have a problem. This is white is a nil value. Okay, so maybe I haven't set this up yet. So in the flake, we have this value is white, but we have not made the method, that returns it. I'm just going to put it right below the very last one here. And I'm using the camel case again for this method. There's is white. Okay, so hopefully that fixed the issue. Okay, that white flake just disappeared. Yep. Okay, I'm going to hit a yellow one, and the game stops. Now, I have no way to reset the game right now. That's fine, but we know the collision is working. You also see, again, how the head is round. So this collision is checking like 12 pixels into his head. It's checking here. So that kind of helps with the fact that this is round and the flake also looks a bit round. So when it's on the very corner, let's say it's here and the edge of this flake is over here, it won't be perfect, but it's good enough. Let's run it again and see if the sides are. I'm looking at the white one on the kind of the side here. This side, yeah, it looks like it's doing. If it's wrong, it's only wrong by a tiny bit. It looks pretty good. Okay, so we have this collision checking. So we need to be doing something if it's white and something if it's yellow. So I'm going to implement the score. So in the game module here, I'm going to make an underscore score equals 0. So that'll just be where we're holding on to the score. And then every time we get a white flake, right here, I'm going to increment it. So we'll say self score equals self.score plus 1. And I'm not going to reset it here. Because if I were to reset it on the yellow, and later on when we display what the score is, the second you hit the yellow flake, your score turns to 0. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have it reset the score when the game is reset. So for right now, since I don't have the font set up and everything else, I'm just going to print out what the score is. Okay, so that should be incrementing every time, and we're printing it out. Let's see if that works. Okay, the number down there on the, you can see that it's moving up. Okay. And we still don't have a reset. So let's work on resetting. That's just simple score thing. I'm going to remove the print because I don't need that there. That was just for checking to make sure the code was correct. So what I want to do is be able to reset the game. When we hit a yellow flake, the game is over. The game is no longer running. So on a reset, basically what I want to do is I'm not going to reset the snowman. I'm going to let him stay where he is, but I need to reset all the flakes. And I also need to make sure the flakes get reset in the way that they are in the very beginning, where we do the full reset, that boolean that we created in the second or third video, where we did the flakes. So above collision here, I'm going to make another method. And this one is just going to loop through the table of flakes and call a reset on the flake. So we already have some looping through the flakes. Since I've already got it here, I'm just going to yank this. And up here, I'm going to paste it. But we don't want to draw the flake. We want to reset the flake. And we want to do the full reset. So I'm going to put this to true. So we need to reset the boolean, the is playing boolean. And we will also need to reset the score. Looks like I put it at the top. And yeah, I guess we could print out the flakes again, just so we can see that it's resetting. Okay, so we have this reset method, and what we're going to do is I'm going to go into the main module, and in here I'm going to add another key press. But again, like I said, we're only going to allow this key press to actually do something when we're not in the playing state. So I'm going to do an elif or an else if. It's spelled funny. Oh no, it is spelled else. Okay. P equals space and not. The game is playing and not. And we're going to do the game reset. Okay, I've done something wrong. I've added a second end. Okay, so if we press the space key, and it's actually spelled space, and this Boolean is not true, it's false. So, and not game is playing, then we allow the reset to take place. Okay, so we got our numbers. Okay, then I hit the yellow, so we had 6. So when I press space, hopefully this is going to reset the flakes, but the snowman will stay exactly where he is. And then if I hit another flake, hopefully it'll start at 1 again. Yeah, looks like that happened. And I'm pressing space right now and it's not resetting. I need the game to not be running like it is right now because I hit the yellow flake. And now I can press space to reset it. So you can't reset it while you're while you're getting a really large score and then you accidentally hit spacebar. It's not going to reset on you. It's only going to reset when you've hit the yellow. Okay. Since I halfway have set up the scoring, let's look real quick at how to use true type font. So I already have a true type font up here. This is Free Sans Bold True Type font. So for us to use true type font, if we go into fonts, it's not actually this one. You'd think it might be this one, but it's actually, since we want to use true type font, it's actually under graphics, not font. But they're nice enough to put a link here. So love graphics new font creates a new font from a true type font. So that's the one we actually want. We want a font that looks nice. So I'm going to use this. I'm going to go into new font, and we can put some different parameters here. We definitely need the file name of the font that we want to use, and we need the size of the font because I want it to be a little bit larger. I want it to be 24. I think it's point size. I don't think it's in pixel size. I think it's a point size. If the file is true type font, it will use size 12. So we're going to change it from size 12 to 24. But we don't care about these other two, so we're going to leave those out. So I'm just going to be using the first two options here. So I'll just grab this in game where we're loading things. We need to load the font, we need to set the font. So underneath the images, we'll say load and set font. And we're going to we're just going to call it font, so it's going to be self.font. So this right here is just going to be self.font. So we got love graphics new font. Now the file that we're using is up here. It's Free Sans Bold TTF. And this is relative path again, so it's going to be fonts and then free sans bold. And I believe I'm using 24 for the size. Yeah, and I'm just going to put the number in here. I don't need to put it anywhere else. So this is loading the font, but this is not setting it, because we could actually load multiple different fonts in different sizes. Then we could set different things and switch back and forth. But since in this game there's only going to be one text in one spot, I'm just going to set it right here. If we go back to here, this is us loading the font, and I believe on this page we have we have some examples. We have a loading a font here, and then we have setting a font. So we're going to use this exact right here to set a font. And then it actually gives us an example of us using the font with love graphics print. And this will be the text we want to print, and this will be the X and the Y coordinates of the top left-hand corner, I believe. Okay, so let's just put this, this method call right here for the setting the font. And the name of our font is the self.font. So we have loaded the font, we have set the font, but we haven't used it. So just like they were using it here, in the example down here, this is how you would actually use it. So I'm just going to grab this. This is just an example printing something with the font that you just set and where. So I'm going to put this inside of the draw. So game, we're drawing the background, then on front of the background we're drawing the player, then in front of that we're drawing the flakes. And so the very last thing that we can draw is the text. So we don't actually want it to say hello world, but I'll just leave that for a second. But I actually want it in the top left-hand corner, so I'm going to change this 100 to 100 to 1010. We'll just leave that hello world for a second and see that it's working. Okay, it says hello world right there. I want it to say a string score, and then I also want it to say the actual score number. So basically I want a string and then the number to display. So I'm going to put score, colon, space, and the way that you append is just with dot dot. I'm going to say self score. So I'm just going to use that directly. Let's just see what this looks like. And we can see the score is working in the top left-hand corner. Okay, so here comes the yellow. So I got 14. So if I press space, it should reset to 0. There it goes. It reset to 0. Okay, that looks perfect. So I'm going to remove this printing here that we had. It's right. Where is it? It's in the collision, isn't it? Yeah, right here. So that's just a quick example using the font. So I'm just loading one font, I'm setting it. You can actually set multiple fonts. You could print one thing out, set a font to a different thing. You could change colors and everything else. But since I just want it to be white, I'm not really doing anything amazing here with this. So that's just loading the free sans bold at point size 24. Then we're setting that. And then down here in the draw method, we are just using it, and I'm just drawing the string, which is score colon space, and then I'm concatenating it with the actual number. And Lua is pretty easy to work with here, and it just lets us throw the number in after it. And this is the whatever the text that's created, the top left-hand corner of it is going to be put at 1010. So it's going to be in your screen if this is 00, 10 in from the left and 10 down from the top. And that will be the origin, the top left-hand corner of that image, that sprite, or that text. Okay, so let's just go over what we did. So in Flakes, we did make some getter methods for left, right, and is white. So we already had this value, the Boolean value is white already existed. We just didn't have this getter method. So we just created these getter methods so they can be used outside of this Flake module. And in Player, we created this top offset here, and then we have a top getter. And since it's not using the self, we are just using the period, not the colon, because it's just using player y and top offset, which are both just constants for us. They're not inside of the player table. And that's just returning that. So that's all we pretty much did on those two. And in main, we added another, we're using the is playing getter. So if the spacebar key is pressed and the game is not in a playing state, it allows us to reset. If it is in a playing space, it's just going to ignore it. Both of these have to be true. It has to not be playing, and we have to be pressing the space key. And that's going to run a game reset. So here we have our is playing getter method. That's just returning the is playing variable, the value that's held there. Our reset is just resetting the score to 0. It is resetting our is playing to true. And it's going through all the flakes, just looping through our whole table of flakes and setting each flake, resetting each flake so it randomly appears somewhere above the screen. And we're doing the full reset on it. We have the collision, and we're checking 3 sides of the flake with 3 sides of the player. So it's bottom of the flake against the top of the player, the right side of the flake against the left side of the player, the left side of the flake against the right side of the player. This is kind of standard box collision in simple games. This is a very simple thing that is used quite often. Even when you do more complicated collision checks, you generally start with this box collision first just to see if you're inside the box before you do the more expensive method to check. So this is something you'll see in any kind of game creation, especially 2D game creation. Okay, so we are checking if the flake is white. So if it's white, we're going to reset the flake and we're going to increment the score. But if the flake is not white, it must be yellow, and we're going to just change the playing to false. And changing the playing to false just means that this update loop no longer goes. This update loop only happens when is playing is true. So when we set that to false, the update never occurs anymore. So player updating, moving the player, that doesn't happen. Moving the flakes doesn't happen. But the drawing still happens. So it still draws everything on the screen 60 times a second. It's just not updating the game. So I think that's everything. We have loaded the font here, the TrueType font, which is over here. We have set the font. We have a new score variable here. I think that's everything. So I hope that was educational or entertaining, and have a good day.